You might remember vaguely reading about poor air quality in Portland. You might have seen memes of golfers continuing to play as the hillside behind them burned. We made sure not to let anything spread further than that. Our Mockingbird team did top-notch work as always. They kept the info limited to local media and suppressed any enterprising OSINT investigators. Not that deterring prying eyes became any easier once the fires were contained. We were lucky the fires started in a remote area. It's no consolation to the people of Brookings, of course. They had to choke on smoke for a month while we were trying to figure out what was hiding in those burning trees. The peak of the fire in September was when it happened. We knew something was wrong when we received a call from the infamous Red Phone to talk to the White House directly. He said that their ballistic missile early warning system had detected a launch out of southern Oregon, but that it had to be a mistake. After that, it was a complete shit show. Everyone in the agency was running around playing whack-a-mole with all the incoming that we were getting. We knew nothing. We were trying to get whatever information we could find. And in the middle of all that mess, we were trying to smooth things over with the other world powers. We barely managed to convince them we weren't conducting secret weapons testing in Southern Oregon. I had to double check, but we definitely weren't. Eventually, we put together a rough picture of what had happened that day. There was a massive explosion deep in the Klamath Mountains. We talked to firefighters who had heard it from miles away. Based on their description of the noise, we estimated it as being less intense than a nuclear blast, but comparable to some of our largest conventional bombs. But then things got weird. For an explosion of that size, we would normally expect to see it detected by seismometers as a small earthquake. But with this, there were nothing. It got weirder. We looked at some of the data from our own satellites, and we immediately knew why everyone else had freaked out. The explosion appeared to be an extremely narrow channel of energy directed upward. We think it even launched some large chunks of mountainside into the upper atmosphere. It looked a lot like a rocket launch. They later told us some of our own missile defense systems made the same error. And this left us with the obvious question: what the hell was it? We racked our brains for the next month, and half trying to figure it out. We couldn't get any clearer pictures with the fire still burning. We sent our own guys there to help speed up the process and make sure they didn't see too much. Was some nut stockpiling explosives? We had the Bureau check all the usual suspects, but there were none in that area. Was it a foreign country's secret cache of weapons? Were they doing this to mess with us before an invasion? Or did they want us to do something stupid? We had nothing to back it up. Briefly, the possibility was tossed around that it was a previously unexploded Japanese munition from World War II, but we threw that out. We wouldn't know anything until the smoke cleared and we had access to the site. Fortunately, the fires were soon cleared and we were able to get a clear satellite photo. It was a prison. Literally a prison. Or at least it looked like one. The fence was barbed wire and there were bars in the windows. We sent a team to it and they even told us that there is a sign above the main entrance at the fence that just said, "Prison." We ordered the team to pull back, regroup, and set up a perimeter. I had to go there and join them. I had to see it for myself. They put me on the first flight out to the site. By the time I landed, we had already set up a significant base of operations about 5 clicks from the building. You know what the first thing I did when I got there was? Nothing. You think we rush into a completely inexplainable situation with zero information? Please, information is our job. Unfortunately, our efforts at figuring this thing out didn't get much better than inexplicable. We have plenty of ways to look inside buildings. This thing was impervious to all of them. Even trying to look through the windows with binoculars didn't work. We later realized that there were two-way mirrors. It looked like a prison, but it might as well have been a black box. The only judgments that we could make were based on the architecture. In our line of work, we see a lot of prisons. We all agreed that the building itself looked like an amalgamation of many of the federal prisons that we all had been used to. It was as if someone had taken design elements from all these places and put them in a blender to create the structure. I even talked to a prison architect we had flown out to the site. He pointed out where all these structural features came from and what they were for. There was only one that we couldn't identify: a large tank on the roof. It looked like any number of storage tanks for all kinds of substances, but because our sensors were dark, we had no way of knowing what was inside. The entire building was at once familiar, but completely generic. It was surreal. The fact that it stood in a burned-out landscape of charred tree trunks only heightened the strangeness. We needed more, so we sent a team to get samples. We wanted them to get pieces of the fence, concrete off of the building, and soil samples at different areas around the facility. The fence killed our guy the second that he made contact with the bolt cutter. We had to tell his family that he was KIA in Afghanistan. Based on the condition of his body, we estimated he took 500,000 volts. It was not pretty. We were mystified. The fence looked like a normal chain-link fence, not an electric one. There were no visible generators for the electricity. We assumed that it was buried underground, but there was no visible wiring on the fence. There was one breakthrough. Even if it raised more questions than it answered, it was still something. Measuring every conceivable environmental characteristic we could think of, we found that the building was a small gravitational anomaly. From the outer ring of the area to the dead center of the building, gravity became imperceptibly more powerful. Usually variations in gravity are driven by natural features, like the density of rock or any ores present within. But here, we're looking at a prison called prison. Days of analysis went by. We arrested some poor sap who got paid off by the Chinese and Brookings. Half the town was probably being paid by foreign agents at this point. They were desperate to know what we had. We were working overtime to keep a lid on it. I was overseeing some threat assessments in town when I got the call. Someone walked out of the prison. He walked down to the killer electric fence and looked straight at our surveillance camera. He smiled, laughed, and then he waved at us. It's time to figure out what the hell's going on here. We were ordered to wait and not go anywhere near him or the structure. It pissed me off at the time, but in retrospect, it was the best thing to do. This guy looked like Santa Claus, a white guy, white hair, and a white beard. He was wearing a shirt, tie, and dark pants with keys in one of his belt loops. He looked like someone playing a prison guard in a movie, except he wasn't carrying a gun, the best we could tell. We put his face into our facial recognition database, looking for any match, but we didn't get anything conclusive. For some reason, our system kept identifying 3 different guys as him, but none of them were. I thought he looked familiar, but I could never place him myself. A group of us agreed that he just had one of those faces that looked like anybody. They put us in a holding pattern for the next week. We were to continue monitoring all of our readings, as well as record when he came out and for how long. For the next week, he came out every single day between 2:15 and 2:25 in the afternoon. He would stand outside, smiling and waving towards our camera for between 2 to 5 minutes, and then he would go back inside. We tried moving our camera to see if he would still know where to look, and somehow he always did. Because of that, we assumed the prison had its own advanced surveillance system, but we had no idea of knowing just what its capabilities were. On one briefing, my boss warned me that people in DC didn't know what to do with this entire situation. There is a significant divide between those who wanted it fully investigated and some who wanted everybody here to just leave. I asked my boss why anybody would want us to just leave, and he said that there were religious concerns at play. I had no idea what that meant. He refused to explain further, so I dropped it. During a week of observation, more teams from the DoD arrived. We were quickly approaching battalion level strength. My boss told me that we wouldn't be making any moves in the compound without warning, but I worried about getting cut out of the loop. I also worried about the special ops guys getting too trigger happy. There was one DoD person that I came to appreciate. Let's call her Alexandria. She came from the DoD's Advanced Research Agency. She was a true pro. She was there to specifically assess how we could defend ourselves from any technology present in the prison or the surrounding area. She had her work cut out for her, and spent most of her time trying to figure out the mysterious electric fence that had killed our guy. She didn't get very far before the holding pattern we were in became untenable. The prison started emitting ash from a chimney. The wind was carrying it over to our camp. We were ordered to stay inside in case it was a biological contamination risk. But one of our scientists collected a sample and she found it was particle matter from wood and paper burning. It's still not good for your lungs, but it was nothing alien. I was talking it over with our scientist, let's call her Rosalind, when Alexandria joined us and pointed out that it was almost 2 p.m. We all looked at each other with the same realization. If we wanted to know what this was, there was an easy way to find out. Let's go ask him, I said. With no time to spare, I put a team together of Rosalind, Alexandria, and myself. I also roped in 2 military guys that I trusted. Let's call them Hampton and Richmond. We got a Jeep and we drove there before anybody noticed that we had left. It was 2:19 when we pulled up in front of the prison, and sure enough, he was there. Hello. It's certainly taken you folks long enough to come say hello, hasn't it? He even sounded jolly. I got out, walked right up to him and said, "Yes, sir. My apologies, but we had to make sure that it was safe." He scoffed. "Of course it's safe. We just don't let anybody in or out." "Is that why your fence killed one of our men?" His face fell. He looked genuinely remorseful, and then he apologized to me personally. He knew my name. I asked him, "How?" "I know all your names," he said. "You all work in the intelligence business. I suppose you could say I do something similar." He refused to elaborate. I asked him what his name was. "You can call me Warden," he said. We asked him what he was burning. "Paper." He refused to say what kind of paper or why. We asked him if we could come in and take a look around. He smiled and said, "Why do you think I've been coming out here every day?" The fence opened by itself and he gestured to let us in. Hampton asked if he and Richmond could keep their weapons, and to our surprise, the warden said yes. Alexandria asked him, "You're not worried about your inmates getting their hands on a firearm?" He laughed and said, "They're all very well behaved, so don't you worry about that." As we walked towards the main door, it was hard not to get the sense that the building was larger than it appeared. Perhaps it just loomed large in my imagination or my memory of that day. Even now, I'm still not sure. I think it was Rosalind who had asked him, "Where did you come from?" All he said was, "We've always been here." Inside was pristine. Most people think of prisons as dark, dank places with dripping water and echoing screams. Nothing could be further from the truth. This place was bright with fluorescent lights going on all the way down a long, wide hallway. The cell doors were not bars like a county jail, but solid steel with one slot for depositing food to the inmate and another small window slot. The floor and the walls were painted white concrete. The cell doors were also painted white. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust. Richmond was the first to ask, "What did they do?" We all looked to the warden. "You know what they did." We didn't. We just stared back. He walked up to a cell door and gestured for us to come over. "See for yourself." He unlocked the window slot to the cell and we looked inside. The interior of the cell was painted a solid red. There was a bed and a sink and a toilet. I didn't see anyone inside, but then jumped as a man got up in front of the window slot and walked over to the bed. They must have been lying against the door. It took me another moment to process when I stopped breathing as I realized who it was. It was my boss in DC. But he was here, and he was wearing a blindfold. I leapt back and screamed at the warden to give me the keys. Hampton and Richmond joined in, pointing their weapons at him. I had Rosalind get the satellite phone to call his office at Langley to warn them. The warden gave me the keys. I put the key in the lock and Rosalind screamed, "Stop!" She handed me the phone. "You screwed me. You completely screwed me over. I don't know if I can protect you from this. Do you know what you've done?" It was my boss. Sir, you're in your office right now." "Of course I am. Where else would I be?" I had him tell me what time it was and what day it was. He answered correctly. He went back to screaming and I hung up. Hampton and Richmond let the warden go. He walked up to me and put his hand on my shoulder. I just stared at whatever looked like my blindfolded boss in the cell. The warden said, "Do you really not know what he did?" The man in the blindfold turned towards us and opened his mouth. A sound like loud static filled the room and I slammed the window slot shut. The warden looked at all of us and said, "You should all come to my office. You might get a better picture of things there." And so we went to his office. The warden's office overlooked the staging area. Unlike the pristine white hallways where the cells were, all parts of the staging area were painted jet black. It was unsettling to say the least. The interior of the warden's office was back to the pristine white paint job. He gestured for us to sit down. "I'm going to assemble the inmates. It might make things clearer for you." We all just looked at each other as the warden pressed a button on his desk. Alexandria spoke up. "Why can't you just tell us what this all is?" The warden took a deep breath. "I have no other ways to explain it. You're supposed to know what all of this is. The fact that you can see me and this building and our inmates is supposed to be the explanation itself. Are we not supposed to be able to see you? What does that mean?" Hampton interjected. The warden sighed. "Everything is wrong. The fact that you don't understand and the fact that I'm even here. The point of this was to show you, but you can't even see it. You can't even understand it. You just see what you want to see." "What are we supposed to see?" Richmond interjected. "The inmates are here. Let's go." We could see them lined up through the warden's office window. We all got up and went to see them. Alexandria gasped and ran over to a woman. It was her, or at least it looked just like her. We found ourselves, we were all there. Richmond, Hampton, Rosalind, and me. All wearing blindfolds, all completely silent. There were others that we knew too. Hampton's CO, the deputy director of the agency. We even found the vice president, or whatever had taken her form. "They are you," the warden said. "They are your friends and colleagues. They are as much themselves here as they are out there. "Why are they blindfolded?" Rosalind asked. "Take it off." The warden gestured to Rosalind. She slowly reached behind her double's head and untied the blindfold. Her double had no eyes. There was only skin where her eyes should have been. We took off the blindfolds on a few more and they were all like that. "This is wrong," Hampton whispered. "Now you're getting it," the warden exclaimed. "Everything is wrong. You all see what you want to see. But this is what you need to see." I had to step aside and think. The group all gathered around the warden, trying to get him to be less circumspect. It was a fool's errand. I found myself looking up at the cavernous ceiling and saw what looked like a large and open end of a pipe facing straight down to me in the floor. I turned back to the warden and I asked him what it was. He looked at it and then back at me stone-faced. He clapped his hands twice. All of the inmates opened their mouths and that same static noise played again, only louder. It sounded like static mixed with roaring water, like from the tides or standing next to a waterfall. I don't have a clear memory of what happened next. I assume that I lost consciousness, but I can't say for sure. I assume that I began hallucinating. It was as if the entire scene in front of my eyes had shattered into 1,000 pieces and those pieces began swarming around every which way. I felt like I went somewhere and that I was seeing everything from far away. I remember water pouring out of the pipe in the ceiling, beginning to flood the entire staging area. I remember running with the team to escape the building before it flooded. None of the inmates moved, even though the water should have swept them away. In the middle of all of this, I was seeing other things too. Things I still could not explain. The best way I can describe it is, it felt like watching cells in a microscope. They looked alive, but not like anything I had ever seen. They were swimming in fluid, but something was wrong with the fluid. And then it was as if they became angry and started fighting against something else, like they were going to war with it. But they lost the war. I came to, running past the gate and up the hill away from the prison. The whole team was with me. We looked back to see the building explode into a gigantic fountain of water. It seemed to melt away into the ground, as the area now formed a new lake amidst the decimated forest. I found out 3 hours later that we had all taken a minor dose of radiation. Fortunately, it wasn't a fatal dose, but we were all bedridden for a few days afterwards. We have no idea why we didn't pick up any radiation emissions on our sensors. The newly formed lake also didn't appear to be radioactive, but we stayed away anyway out of an abundance of caution. The debrief was like no other debrief I had ever had. We theorized it could have been anything from aliens to extra-dimensional beings, to fairies and demons or mass hallucinations. Even though we had some physical evidence, no explanation seemed conclusive. We couldn't prove our guy killed by the electric fence was killed by an alien machine. We couldn't prove the radiation that we had all absorbed was from anything more exotic than minor mishandling of nuclear material. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending on how you look at it, we were given one more chance to try and understand the mystery behind all of this. The day after our briefing, the newly formed lake disappeared. At the center of where it used to be was a perfectly round hole. The best we could tell from our readings, it was 200 feet deep and it included multiple chambers. We had repurposed Mars rovers from NASA make a full survey of the site. We still couldn't detect any extra radiation. The increased gravity was still present, and we traced it to the central chamber. Based on these readings, I advocated sending in another team, and to my surprise, my superiors agreed. Apparently, our experience in the prison had sufficiently scared the shit out of enough people in Washington. They wanted whatever information we could gather, and they didn't care what we had to do to get it. And so we put a team together. We took the hike to the now empty lake bed and set up our equipment above the hole. We were going to rappel down into the chambers and report back with what we found. We had more professional gear this time. We wore cameras, a bevy of sensors, and we were to keep in constant contact with home base. That turned out to be easier said than done. I volunteered to be the first to go down into it. I rappelled down about 50 feet onto a ledge. The central hole went down another 150 feet, but this ledge was its own tunnel leading to the first chamber some ways away. Our second squad mate was about to hook up his gear and rappel in when there was a deafening noise. It sounded like electronic feedback mixed with the roaring engine of an F-16. I think I blacked out for a moment. I looked up at the surface and saw that our gear was gone. I shouted to see if anyone was there. There was no response. I assumed that they had been knocked unconscious by whatever that sound was. I tried raising home base on the radio, but there was no reply either. There was nothing else for me to do but go forward. The tunnel was perfectly cut out of the rock. It was as if a clean semicircle had been punched out like a knife slicing through butter. I thought the rock looked like obsidian, but I had no way to confirm that. I came to the first chamber. It was a large room and in it was another frickin' office. It was set in the rock face up a flight of stairs from where I was probably another 50 feet across the space. It was behind thick steel doors and a picture window. I could see instrument panels with blinking lights and 2 computers on the desk facing the window and towards me. Slowly, I made my way up the stairs. I walked up and I came to the steel door. I turned the wheel and, to my surprise, the door slowly swung open. I walked into the office and that's when I saw them. This person should not have been there. There was no possible way for them to be standing in front of me, but there they were. This was someone that I was once very close to. Looking into their face and into their eyes, I finally understood. I understood why this had happened. I understood what we had done. It wasn't just about me or any of my colleagues or any one person. It was all of us and what we had all done. I understood what was wrong. Everything was wrong. Everything was broken. Broken in such a fundamental way and on such a massive scale that it was impossible to put into words. Unless we did something, it was only going to get worse. Much worse. That is why this had happened. That is why we were seeing these things. We wanted to see them. We needed to see them if we were going to have even the smallest chance of fixing it. Suddenly, the steel door spun shut. I turned around with a start, but I knew what had happened. The room outside of the office filled with fire and smoke. People had to know about this, but I didn't know if anyone would even understand. I knew that my best words might not even reach the places that they needed to reach. If they did, they might end somewhere where no one would comprehend them or believe them. They might simply drift into the ether. But I knew I had to try. This was too important. And so I sat down at the computer and I began to write. There's a reason you don't remember the Oregon wildfires. You might remember vaguely reading about poor air quality in Portland. You might have seen memes of golfers continuing to play as the hillside behind them burned. We made sure not to let anything spread further than that. Our Mockingbird team did top-notch work as always. They kept the info limited to local media and suppressed any enterprising OSINT investigators. Not that deterring prying eyes became any easier once the fires were contained.